Harry. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Corporate Governance and Audit Committee. So we'll start with the agenda. So membership of the committee. We've just got membership. We've got nobody substituting. We have got a few. Well, we've got one apology, haven't we, from Councillor Mather. There's a couple of people not here yet, so we don't know. We haven't had a specific apology, so we will see. Okay, item 2. Minutes of the previous meeting. Are people happy with those minutes? Any comments on those?
Move them.
Thank you. Everyone happy with that? Okay, declarations of interests. Any interest anyone needs to declare? Councillor Dill.
I'm not sure whether I need to declare an interest, but I was a member of the Democracy Commission. We've also got a report on the Democracy Commission recommendations.
Okay, thank you. Okay, admissions of the public. It's a public meeting. We're on webcast. There's nothing that we're planning to take in private, so that's fine. Deputations and petitions?
None received, Chair.
Okay. Right, so move on to item 6 then. That's implementation of the Democracy Commission recommendations update. Pass to Rick. Lee.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Just as a little bit of background to this report, obviously it arose out of the Democracy Commission work into the governance models. So Council originally asked the Democracy Commission to look at governance models, alternative models. This committee oversaw that work as the Corporate Governance and Audit Committee, and it reported regularly throughout its review, which culminated in the recommendations being accepted. One of the recommendations was that a report would come back to this committee asking about just setting out the implementation of those recommendations. So that's what this report basically is. You'll recall that once they did the review, the main outcome from the review was that we basically stay with the current leader and cabinet model, but there were issues raised as part of the review about how we could kind of involve backbench councillors a bit more, and what came out of it was really a lot of stuff around the scrutiny function. I think it was felt that strengthening the scrutiny function, delivering more pre-decision was a way of involving more backbench councillors, and ultimately something that would contribute to better, more informed decision making. So that's a bit of the background to where it came from and where we got to. So the recommendations from the Commission, as I say, the initial recommendation was to stick with leader and cabinet, which is what we did. As part of developing the scrutiny function, they wanted a review of the structures. Now that happened and was approved by full council last year. The main changes that arose from that review was that Overview and the Scrutiny Management Committee took on responsibility for performance and financial management. So they now oversee the council plan. They get regular reviews of the financial situation, and that was added to their role. We changed. I think it was environment and climate change took on kind of, it really focused in on the climate change and environment agenda, and growth and regen was created. That came from out of the old environment and climate change, and that went into growth and regen, and that became a standalone panel to look at the sort of regeneration programs, all the initiatives that are going on within town centres, and also small town centres as well. So that was the main changes that arose from the structure. Obviously, corporate disappeared. That was disestablished, and a lot of that work went into overview and scrutiny management. So the structure was done. That was approved at last annual council, and it's been in place for the last 12 months. One of the main issues, again, that came out of it was around pre-decision, and this was kind of a lot of the focus of the Commission when they met was around trying to encourage pre-decision. And just for those that maybe not too familiar, pre-decision is obviously where you're kind of plotting in decisions along the way, and you're getting more input from scrutiny on the way to Cabinet. It's not without its challenges, particularly in terms of timing, and selecting the items where you can add value, I think, is an important thing. I think not everything is kind of worth pre-decision. You know, there are some things that, you know, are more process-driven and they will just naturally go through. But I think the pre-decision items where the value can be added are kind of more the longer-term strategies, and a lot of decisions that go on to Cabinet, but it does rely on that kind of early engagement to shape any decisions and policies. And I think that's where we're trying to get to with the increase in pre-decision. I do allude in the report to the fact that there has been, I would say, a marked increase in the amount of pre-decision scrutiny that's gone on. But I do also point to the fact that that doesn't necessarily mean, you know, an increase in the amount is not necessarily mean that it's effective and, you know, worthwhile. So there's Appendix 2, there is a log of the pre-decision work that's gone on in the last 12 months. And as I say, some of that has been really positive. And I do think we can point to quite I say, an increased amount, and I think quite a lot of effective scrutiny around some of the big decisions that have come through. But I do acknowledge that it's difficult in terms of the timing. And one of the things we introduced was a protocol to try and, I mean, good pre-decision is all around kind of engagement, communication between Cabinet, between the scrutiny panel chairs. So we developed a protocol that was kind of looking to foster that engagement. So there are regular meetings now that Cabinet members have with chairs, with strategic directors, to kind of horizon scan things that are coming through. So that's been a positive thing on pre-decision in terms of the protocol. And as I say, that's been working quite well. I will say with pre-decision, it's an ongoing thing, so those channels of communication need to remain open all the time. It develops, and as I say, really we're looking at the outcomes as to where scrutiny has added the value, and I think that's important. And I think we've looked to encourage people writing Cabinet reports now, and this has started to happen, and I'm pleased about that it does reference the scrutiny input in these Cabinet reports. So I think that is an important factor that because sometimes scrutiny can make a lot of recommendations and comments, and they can almost just not disappear into the ether, but it doesn't necessarily always feed through into a formal response from Cabinet. And we have tried to encourage that Cabinet do make reference to the scrutiny recommendations, they acknowledge them, and again there's a feedback loop to implementation as well. So I do think that's important, and that's something we have tried to encourage. Just on some of the wider things that have happened this year, again, scrutiny, we've looked at training, we've delivered in-house training to all new panel members and to lead members, and that's something that we are looking to continue. So that was quite a detailed piece of work there, and again, it just kind of, it's not only for new members on scrutiny panels, but for existing members, and it's just to familiarise people with the mechanisms that are there, what's open to them, because there is quite a lot of flexibility in scrutiny in terms of how you input and how you engage. So the training kind of looks at the legislative stuff, the powers and things like that, but also around questioning techniques and preparations for meetings, and how you can best get the best out of a scrutiny meeting. So I think in summary, that's pretty much where we're up to with the recommendations. As I say, there has been a lot of progress, I feel, around scrutiny this year, but I do think it's an evolving thing that needs to keep happening. keep the kind of relationships between cabinet members and scrutiny panel member chairs and what have you. So it's yeah, I think it's been a positive year, I would say.
Thank you for that, Lee. Councillor Smith, do you want to come before I bring in the panel members?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, we've done a lot of work on pre-decision scrutiny, and I am a keen advocate of pre-decision scrutiny because I do think it can add a lot of value to the process. As has been said, we developed the protocol for when there is long lead times for items. But we have also developed now a protocol for when there isn't a long lead time. So if there is something that scrutiny feels that it needs input into, such as the Kirklees Active Leisure Review that happened, scrutiny had some input about the consultation, but also once the report had been published for Cabinet, scrutiny had the opportunity then to have the item at OSMC, and we put a list of recommendations to the Cabinet for their meeting. So there is now both a process for putting recommendations into a Cabinet report before it is published, but also a process of putting recommendations forward to Cabinet after a Cabinet report is published, where there are short lead times. It is imperative that we do have recommendations from panels so they can go into Cabinet reports, and part of the training that we've put in place for lead members in actual fact highlights the need for recommendations to be put forward. The training now, you might think, well, I've been on scrutiny a long time and, you know, everything. But in actual fact, we do have changes. There have been some changes this year in the area of health. So it is good for everybody to keep up to date. And we have put in place now annual training for scrutiny members and for lead members as well. I think that there is a lot of work still to do. It is a work in progress, and I do hope that this can continue and the dialogue that we have with officers and cabinet members can continue productively so that this can be strengthened as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Lee. Number of comments, if I may. Firstly, the points that Liz has just also raised around the recommendations that come out of pre-decision scrutiny, it'd be really good to see almost like a template developed so that cabinet reports have a section in there that has comments on pre-decision scrutiny. So if there are no comments, it says no comments. And I think that would be something that could build on, and that would help build that understanding of all council members, not just the members of scrutiny or the cabinet, that there is a pre-decision scrutiny process, if I can say it, in place, and where that actually has been involved in a decision that's been taken by cabinet. So I think that would probably be a helpful recommendation from this committee going forward. The work that we did with the Democracy Commission on looking at the governance models was wider than just scrutiny and pre-decision scrutiny. And one of the things that came across quite strongly, I was a member of that working party, one of the things that came across quite strongly, regardless of whether you had a committee system or whether you had a strong leader and cabinet system, was where it worked well, was where there was openness and transparency and the sharing of information. And the one thing that I reflect on from our recent council meetings, the budget meeting, was there did seem to be a feel across the chamber that there were better ways of approaching the development of the budget and the sharing of that information. And I just would like to see something coming forward on the back of those discussions at budget. I'm not asking for a commitment, but I think it's something that would be valuable, would build on that openness, transparency. People have a better understanding of how and why decisions are taken. So just an observation on that. Then on the actual report itself, I agree with Lee's comments about pre-decision scrutiny being work in progress. There have been a number of occasions where I've commented on the scrutiny panels that I sit on, where we get a report to scrutiny and it's bouncing straight into Cabinet a week, 2 weeks later. You know, that doesn't give any opportunity for any reflection by officers or Cabinet members on the conversation or the observations that have been made by the scrutiny panel. We need to get much tighter at making sure that there is an adequate timeline between things coming to scrutiny and things going subsequently through for a decision. So pre-decision scrutiny is great, but if it's too late in the process, it's too late for anything really to change, which undermines its relevance. And then just on the Appendix 3, some of the dates just confused me. So number 6, information communicated to all members. It suggests that scrutiny web pages were actioned in May 24, which is next month, and that online learning modules are actioned in June 24. Now, I'm not sure whether that's 23 or that's where... Right, okay. That makes a lot more sense. And then item 7 is showing as amber, but it's saying the training was delivered in May, June last year. So I don't understand why that's amber and not green. Sorry, Chair.
I would accept that probably could be green because it's something that annually now is going to take place. I think it's because it's happened once and it's built in now to the programme. I'd accept that probably should be a green, yeah.
Yeah, because I was going to say, you know, on number 5 as well, I wasn't really quite sure what the outstanding action was on that one as well, because, again, that refers to training, but the action seems to refer to things to do with like timings of meetings and stuff, which doesn't seem to be part of the action, so I don't know if that's been completed or is, again, an ongoing thing.
I think just to come back on the timings of meetings, I think that was I wouldn't say, and I don't know if Councillor Taylor would agree, I don't think that was a major element of the committee's work. I mean, we did sort of say, I think that the context around that recommendation was really encouraging backbench councillors to be involved in scrutiny, and whether there were any barriers to them not wanting to be on scrutiny panels or working groups and things like that. So there was some discussion about whether it was around timings of meetings, whether there was enough training, whether they were aware of the role and stuff like that. I think it probably needs a wider discussion, maybe at group business manager level or leading members in terms of timings of meetings. That's something that's not happened at the moment.
Yeah, I think on the timings of meetings, as chair of scrutiny, I am still keen that we have meetings at times when councillors who work can come to scrutiny and we can hear more voices in scrutiny. I am still keen on that. As Leah said, I think it needs a discussion across the groups to get the agreement for that, rather than scrutiny just saying, okay, all our meetings are going to be at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Do you know what I mean? So, or whatever. I think that it does need some agreement, but as chair of scrutiny, I would like to see the times of meetings changed so we can get more people involved.
Yeah, it was part of the discussions at the Democracy Commission when we were looking at the governance structure, and what you found from, and it came across in a number of the meetings that we had with other councils, that they, regardless of whether it was a committee system or a cabinet and strong leader, they also had the same problem about getting engagement from backbench councillors, and it was about timings, or, you know, availability, but it wasn't just about scrutiny meetings at that point. It was about all meetings. I don't want it to think that's just we need to change the time of scrutiny meetings. It was about how easy is it for councillors. There was that discussion about would they be better all in the evening, but then the point was made that a lot of community meetings are in the evenings, which councillors attend as well. So it's a difficult one. It maybe it's varying the times of the meetings rather than always having them, you know, this meeting always needs to be 10 o'clock on a Friday. You know, if there was some later in the day or different days, it might give other councils an opportunity that Fridays are difficult for to attend. It was more that point. And I think you're right, it is amber, but it probably needs a clearer action around who is taking ownership and responsibility for driving that one through, really.
Yeah, that's fine. I think just on those, I think for me it's just about, it's not the specifics of what we're doing. I think it's more just to say, because if we've got amber, it looks like we're saying we've not completed those actions, or they're not to plan, I guess. And I think what we're saying is we've completed actions, but some of the actions are going to be ongoing. That's what it feels like to me. So I guess it's just making sure we understand what we mean by green, amber, etc. And you know, I guess what we're saying is these actions that are amber are going to be ongoing because we're going to keep developing training. We're going to keep looking at appropriateness of when we have meetings, what the structures are, etc. Chris.
Yeah, thanks. So first of all, I find it a really interesting report. It's way outside my area of expertise, but it does fill in a few gaps about how decisions are made, so that's useful. I think I'm going to stop watching Cabinet quite so much and start watching Scrutiny when I've got half an hour, because it sounds like that's more interesting. I'm always controversial. So I suppose it's very much process and structure focused. It seems to me good governance and good democracy is founded on values, behaviours and culture, and I don't know where that fits into the governance and the democracy review, but at some point that needs to be addressed, I would suggest. A lot of the actions are around training, which are kind of easy to record as actions, but real difficult to deliver and evaluate the impact of. So I don't know where in that process there's an evaluation whether the training actually makes any difference to behaviours and what happens. I'm reading it kind of literally, and I kind of hesitate to say, but when I looked at action 3, which is around provision of transparent, accessible information, I just couldn't see that the measures specifically addressed the issue. Now, it might be my misunderstanding, but it felt like to address something around transferable, accessible information, you have to do something really conscious. So training and two training offers might or might not address it, but it didn't feel sufficient just reading it in a very literal way for me.
Thank you. Councillor Pinnock.
Strangely enough, that's a similar point about transparency and sharing information. Within a report that is focused really on scrutiny and cabinet roles and how they interweave and how one can influence the other. But transparency and sharing information has never been more important within a cabinet system where in this council 59 councillors don't make decisions except on the budget and perhaps something else, maybe. So it's at a corporate level, but at a ward level, of course, councillors do continue to influence specific ward decisions. And some directorates are much, much better at sharing information and being prepared to listen than others. Highways, I think, are really good. You know, you get a big highways plan within your ward, you get involved in and asked about whether the scheme would work type thing. Others are poor. So I've come to the conclusion for issues in my ward that the easiest thing is to send in FOIs, because residents in my ward who do get the information much more quickly than we do as councillors, and I just find that unacceptable. So if I'm using this meeting to send a message to directorates about involving ward members in key issues in their wards by sending them information and listening to what they have to say.
Okay, yeah. Don't disagree with you on that one. I'm not sure there's anybody who wants to can answer that question, but yeah, I think we take that.
where my experience is shared by others.
I think,
But-
yeah, I mean, I would just say on that, I think there's truth to that. I think there's also truth to the fact that as councillors, we probably also get information which we might think, oh, well, wasn't that interested in knowing that. So it's, do you know what I mean? It's the balance, isn't it? And I suppose that's what the officers are trying to obviously also balance out. Councillor Taylor?
I agree with you. A few years ago, I was part of a group, working group that did some work on the councillor-officer relationship. And there was a desire from officers to share a lot more information with councillors, but there was a danger that councillors would be just drowning in the number of emails and the information that was being provided. And it's difficult because every councillor has a slightly different level of engagement and interest in different issues to get that balance right. But just to agree with Kath on that, I've banged on in a number of committees about the council not recognising well enough the fact that councillors are elected representatives of communities. And the perfect example, which is happening right now, is the library service review, where the library staff have been out, they've spoken to volunteers of the libraries, they've been out and spoken to parish councils and town councils, but they had no intention of speaking to the ward councillors in the areas that are impacted, until I kicked off and said I wanted a meeting with them. That's a perfect example of, here's an issue that undoubtedly is going to impact on your community and your wards, and we're not going to engage with you. But we'll go round you, we'll talk to other people in your community, we'll even talk to elected representatives of parish and town councils, but not ward councillors. So again, if people are listening, you know, that's the message to take back. We are elected representatives and we expect to be treated as representatives of our community. So if there are things impacting our communities, we expect to be involved and informed. We expect to be listened to as well. So a bit of a rant, but I apologise.
No, that's fine. Well, Graham's listening. I'm sure you can take that take that to the cabinet as a...
I can, but obviously I'm not involved in the library review, so I'm not involved in the process at the moment. Or this
I
time
wasn't meaning
round.
specifically the library, but I was just meaning the general debate. But yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so John's right. The opposite could tend to send tons of information out, and where's the end of it? You know, as you'll appreciate, I get a lot more than the rest of it because I've got lots of various interests, if you like. So you can drown in it very quickly. Once you, and I would say this, once you lose control of your inbox, you never get it back. Well, you know, sometimes days I get 100 emails a day sometimes, and if I'm on a holiday or as we are at the moment, quite busy with other things, you never get it back. It takes you months to get it back. Then you go on holiday and you can't get it back again. So it's about what is the level of information. I mean, I would say I'm surprised to get a response from an FOI quicker than an officer, because we always have delays with FOIs because we struggle to hit our timescales. And from a personal point of view, please don't send FOIs because they cost us a small fortune that could be spent on other things. Chase the officers up if you're not getting it from officers. Use the officer. I'm sure if you contact them a couple of times, they'll get back to you.
Go on. Yeah, Councillor.
I accept the argument about being deluged with information emails. And that's not really the point I was trying to make, which was more about specific issues that affect our wards, where highways, I think, do a really good job. And if ever you have a road closure, you have information about it, plenty of time in advance. Any major scheme in your ward, you have it plenty of time in advance and can get involved. Others are not so good. So I'll just give you a current example. Out and about, as we are all doing, get a phone call from a cafe in town saying they've just put up the consultation notices about the car parking charges. I expect you know about that already, don't you? Of course, we hadn't. We hadn't had that notification. And it was only happened after I rang Julie Muscroft about it, that then an email went out saying the consultation is starting. That's basic stuff. And it's a similar example to the library review. You know, people in your ward then ask you, and you look stupid by saying, actually, no, we knew nothing about it. And it's a poor reflection on the council as well, because then people interpret that lack of information as a sort of conspiracy, that they don't want people to know about it. So it's that, and it's a simple thing to do, and I'll make that plea.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think just to add to that, even sometimes where things are notified, I think there needs to be some thought given to the fact that obviously if you notify a councillor at 9 o'clock in the morning and the consultation goes out at 10, you may not have, you may be sat in this meeting and not have read that. So, you know, obviously there's a bit of thought isn't there, around that. I think, just to say from the council's perspective as well, I think what we need to do, I think you've given a good example about the highways, is that, because I do think to myself sometimes that officers come to me with information about my ward, and I read it and I digest it, but I don't necessarily go back to them and say, that was really useful, send me things. I like the fact you're sending me things like that, and maybe we could do that a little bit more, highlight the good examples to the relevant senior manager or whatever, so they know what kind of works as well, so to give us a bit of understanding, you know, of what actually kind of formats and what we like to, the kind of stuff that we like to see. Okay, so on the report, I think we've gone through the part on there. I think we've just commented in terms of the some of the actions around just understanding on whether they're completed, whether they're ongoing actions. Yeah,
I'm happy to pick up just a couple of things that have been mentioned in the discussion. Councillor Taylor's point about the template and feeding in with pre-decision. We have done some work around that, just in terms of guidance to officers. So where there's an engagement, then we feel that obviously engagement with scrutiny is something that it's not always made reference to, and we are trying to push that with officers, and just to make them think that, and like you say, even if there's nothing material that came of it, just to mention that it went, and you know there were comments made, but maybe they didn't result in recommendations, which goes back to Councillor Smage's point about recommendation. I do think that is an important piece of work. You can see some, and I see it myself, some really good discussions in scrutiny panels where they really ask a lot of searching questions, and I think the issue around it is probably more about how it gets drawn together at the end, whether those questions result in a kind of a course of action that the committee can come behind, and that comes down to the chair a lot of the time, but the panel as well. And I think sometimes if there is, and I do advocate for sort of pre-meetings before scrutiny where you can almost have an informal chat about particular lines of questioning and where you think it might go and where you think potential recommendations could arise. And that's not to preempt, because the discussion may go another way, but it's just to sort of give it a bit of structure in terms of the way things are questioned. And as I say, I'll come back to the important role of the chair in kind of drawing that together and sort of bringing it into what we could have as a formal recommendation to go forward. So they were the only things I wanted to say. And I do think, like you say, and Councillor Taylor touched on this, when we did the review into governance models, I think we looked at committee systems, we looked at, leader and cabinet, and ultimately there were good examples in all different authorities of both, and what it came down to was where you've got a good culture, and again, this comes into engagement, information sharing, where the culture's right, the governance model to some extent is secondary, because they all work. It's just around the culture within an organisation. So I just wanted to pick up on those points.
Yeah, just wanted to come back. So the standard cabinet reports and the standard reports that come to council, towards the back of them they have a number of points, and I can't remember all of them. The impact, financial impact on young people, whether there's an equality review done or something like that. And they're standard, they're in every single report. I'd like to see an addition to that has that kind of scrutiny input. Because then you can just have no comment if it's not gone. But I don't know who is accountable and responsible. I'm looking at Rachel here, actually. But to drive that focus, it needs an owner. This won't happen unless somebody says, That's my job to make sure that gets incorporated into reports. So if we could have that commitment from this committee, I think that would be really, really helpful.
Yeah, thank you. And just to sort of support Lee in that it seems to be an ongoing, never-ending process is getting the right quality of information in Cabinet reports. And clearly everything that we experience through scrutiny feedback as well as others is then hopefully reflected in the report. And as Lee said, there's what's in the report in terms of sections, and then there's the guidance in the background, because obviously there'll be different levels of quality for people who are filling in those reports. And we've got a really sort of a clear sign-off process to try and make sure that the senior officers are checking that, you know, the financial information is accurate. So we will commit to take that away in terms of where we can fit that into the report so that it's clear based on the feedback from this committee. So thank you for that.
Yeah, because just to summarise, I think based on the discussion that we had, you know, if recommendations come through, which is now what we're trying to achieve, then obviously there needs to be some feedback on what the cabinet view or whatever was on those recommendations, because otherwise nobody's any the wiser, are they, as to whether it helped or not, or what the decision made was. But I've not been on the scrutiny myself the last few years, but I think what's been, and I've not done the training, but what's been described sounds to me a good move forward, because I think it is important that we have recommendations, because I was on a lot of scrutiny panels in the past where there was really good discussion, but so what? There was nothing that came, there was no, and I think the officers or the cabinet members who came, it wasn't that they weren't interested, it was like, well, what do I now do with that information, because it wasn't formatted into any sort of conclusion or recommendation. So I think that does sound like a very positive step. So yeah, good.
Sorry to interrupt. And if there are recommendations, which is a key, then officers have something to go away and work on, and scrutiny has something to follow up and check whether it's been done as well. And I think that's a key part of the process.
Definitely. Okay, thanks everyone. So we'll just note that that report. Thanks for the discussion. Good discussion. Okay, we'll go to item 7, which is the terms of reference to the Health and Wellbeing Board. Rachel?
Yes, thank you, Chair. First, I just want to apologise, because it looks like as the formatting, as the documents have been uploaded, the track changes one doesn't seem to have the track changes on it, and I think it must be as it's converted into a PDF. So if it's okay with the committee, I'll just talk you through the main changes. So obviously this is not an unfamiliar process. This comes to Corporate Governance and Audit every year on its route to annual council. The first thing to say is there's nothing fundamental in terms of the changes. There's no changes to the statutory responsibilities of the Health and Wellbeing Board. They are minor changes. The key one is about the request for the chair to be able to nominate a deputy from within the board to be able to obviously better provide that ongoing leadership. So that's probably the most significant change. We've changed a few names. For example, the university's name was slightly wrong. We've taken off the recommendation of the council's chief executive being a member, because obviously we've got quite a lot of coverage across the key directorates anyway. We've tidied up the language to reflect some of the new health and care strategies and some of the terminology that's got used through the Integrated Care Board, etc. But fundamentally, that's it in terms of the changes to that document. I'm very happy to circulate the track changes ones outside of this meeting, but again, there's nothing substantial other than the ones I've identified today. So any comments, obviously happy to receive.
Councillor Taylor?
Mine's not so much a comment as a question. And it's probably my ignorance, really. Is mental health represented here somewhere? Because I don't recognise the name of mental health, but I'm sure it's one of them. But I don't know which it is. That's my ignorance.
It's South West Yorkshire Partnership Foundation Trust is the mental health trust, but you're right to ask, because sometimes it isn't quite clear, is it?
Chris?
Yeah, I spent 20 years of my working career in meetings like this asking for and colleges to be added to the line that says schools, because it seems perverse to miss, you know, the 3 fantastic colleges we have in Kirklees. I'm not sure they want to be represented, but the voice of those students ought to be heard somewhere.
Okay, Councillor Pinnock.
I serve on the Health and Wellbeing Board, and so these changes are minimal, really. The bigger issue that is not addressed in here, because it's going to, I think, feature this coming year is how the Health and Wellbeing Board fits in an effective way with the new integrated care partnership, integrated care boards, and how it's focus, because I think there is still a very important role for it, but I think the focus of what the Health and Wellbeing Board does will need to change, so there's not duplication of effort. But I think that discussion is yet to come. But what's in here is procedural stuff, really.
Just to completely agree with Councillor Pinnock, I think because the Integrated Care Board, both the West Yorkshire system and how it relates at place, is constantly evolving with new responsibilities coming from NHS England and from other bits, it's really, really tricky to keep track with that. And I think what we've tried to do with the language is leave it open enough that we can then set our own health and wellbeing board with the outcomes we want to achieve for our Kirklees population within whatever parameters we can set that board up. So it will, as you say, continue to evolve, and I think that's why the move to having more informal sessions to really understand what we're trying to achieve is a key part of that. So I absolutely agree. And I take the challenge on colleges. You're right, that ought to be referenced in there as well, so thank you for that.
Oh, Councillor Midge.
Yeah, could I just ask a quick question? Did you say the Chief Executive of Kirklees Council has been taken off because it's not crossed out?
Yes, and that's again because that happened.
That's the track change.
That's the track change.
Okay, all right, that's fine. I also wanted to say that I noticed about the West Yorkshire Integrated Care Partnership. I just wanted to say that there is also the relationship between Health and Wellbeing Board scrutiny and West Yorkshire as well. So the West Yorkshire scrutiny panel is also evolving as to how we deal with scrutiny at a West Yorkshire level, how we deal with it at place, and the input of health and wellbeing boards as well. So how they all work together, I think, is an important piece of work going forward as well. Yeah.
Yeah, just to say, dentistry has been really a good example of that because it's potentially being scrutinised once at West Yorkshire and then in 5 different places, which might be perfectly legitimate, but how do we ensure that that's the right way of doing it? So I agree with that.
All right. So thanks for that, everybody. So we're happy to approve these, I think, with the you added a bit of the college bit against the schools. Happy with that? Okay. Okay, so we're on to the internal audit plan 24-25. Martin?
Morning, everyone. Hello. So this is my proposed audit plan for you to approve for the first half of 24-25. So those of you who've been on the committee for a long time will remember that we normally do this linked in with the annual report of internal audit, and there is indeed a logic to that, which is you see what we think happened in the previous year, 23-24, as would be, and we sort of use that as part in helping to plan for 24-25. I think we were probably unusual in doing that because I think we were one of the few organisations that both did the audit planning essentially a little bit late and the annual reporting a little bit earlier. For pure logistic reasons, we've separated these out this time because of the fact that this committee is quite tight in the timings of the year end for 23-24. So we will be bringing the annual report of internal audit for 23-24 to the meeting on the 10th of May. So I am sort of asking you to consider this alongside me because it's sort of your decision under my advice. Without the benefit of seeing what we found in 23-4, you have seen 3 quarters of the year's reporting, and you'll see the 4th quarter as well as the annual report at next time. So what we have here is a little bit of a report about basically planning and resourcing for 24-25, and then a little bit of information about the core areas of organisational business control and financial and system controls. A proposed draft audit plan for the first half of the year, a proposed audit plan for the second half of the year, both of which we think are achievable within the resources that we believe we have available, And then a little bit more detail for you to see essentially where the risk scoring has come from, what the total time allocations between various activities and service areas and for each particular audit are, and the sort of things that we would do if we had a little bit more resource. So they're the bits that are kind of getting missed out for this year. And they're the ones that are shaded grey in the Appendix 3. So that's the core documentation that really requires a decision, but also under the Public Sector Internal Audit Standards, which is a subset of the International Internal Audit Standards, we're also required to actually agree a sort of, well, what is technically at the moment only a mission strategy and charter, but the new global internal audit standards also require these to have a mandate, so I thought we would add that in. The mandate is essentially nothing other than how the organisation sees internal audit fitting within it. So it's just what we have previously, well, it's what's contained in the Council's financial regulations. And then I have put in a tiny commentary about the areas where I believe that we are potentially at risk next year of not being compliant with global internal audit standards, but this is still a matter of some degree of uncertainty because we haven't seen the government's interpretation for local authorities or public sector bodies and local authorities. The only area where there is essentially conflict, as far as I can tell, is that my own roles and duties involve areas of activity where those audits, the internal audit work on those activities purely under the standard would then require them to be carried out by a completely independent party. Our current arrangements is that when we audit bits that I manage, the audit team audit them without my intervention and report to my supervisor, which is Julie at the moment. That's not technically allowed now. That having been said, the only area of high risk that I manage, most of the work we do is essentially consultancy. The only area of high risk I manage is insurance, and the biggest risk area of insurance operation is the insurance fund, which is already subject to external review by the insurance company. So they do their own auditing of that, and they report that to me essentially. So I could start sharing that with you. They only do it about every 5 years, but there is that, that's externally audited already or externally reviewed. So that's all I want to say really, other than to take questions, Chair, if that's okay.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Taylor, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Martin. Couple of comments, observation. In terms of the draft plan itself, one thing that doesn't appear in the plan that I thought would feature in the plan, and this is because I'm a member of the Housing Improvement Board, is that there is an ongoing process to implement a new version of CX, the system that's used to manage all of the housing activity, and there's a data migration involved in that as well. I would have thought that internal audit would have had some role to play in that process, and it doesn't appear on here.
It doesn't, and you're absolutely right. And I suspect we've not included it because of the fact that there's been so much uncertainty about how quickly that's being implemented. But if you think, I will check that back, Councillor Taylor. I think it's a very valid comment.
Yeah, it worries me if you guys aren't involved in it.
We haven't had a lot of involvement. We sort of tend to hear it at a strategic end about where it's got to. But so yeah, I will check that back. But it's a very good point.
There has been a report to Cabinet, I think, from memory, about the plan for implementation. And I've been acting as a bit of a critical friend on this anyway, which is probably why I'm picking it up as, you know, being missing. But I think it is something we need to look at. That was my comment on the actual plan itself. Then my other observations are my usual. In terms of the amendments to the mandate mission draft strategy document, I've only commented on the yellow bits, which I'll give you afterwards. But there are a number of occasions where it doesn't actually strictly make sense. I don't think somebody's read it after they've written it again. Also, there's an Americanization of spelling. There's no Z in organisation. And there's a number of points where it looks untidy and there could be better better tidied up. I don't have any problem with actually what it's trying to do and say, but if this is an ongoing document that we will be maintaining, it doesn't look to be the standard we'd really want of a document. That's it, Chair.
Okay, well,
Chair, I take that as completely legitimate criticism. I think there's one of the problems with this, which is that the document, we are required to produce it and no one ever really looks at it because it's a sort of set of statement of standards that somebody would look at if at some point in the future somebody said, what are you actually doing? We do follow the content of it, but it isn't something which people look at regularly. I think I also commit to the fact that we will rewrite it completely for to align with the new global internal audit standards, and we'll ask you to approve a completely new version. So happy to look at a bit of editing and tidying and whatever, and thank you for the commentary, Councillor Taylor. But I don't want to spend too much resource on it because of the fact that I don't think it's got a long life, and I don't think people...
it's a 5-minute job.
Okay, thank you.
well, if you've got some, you can provide comments back. Fantastic. Yeah, that sounds good. Sounds good. Any other comments? Chris, yeah? And then Kath?
I suppose firstly I'm content with the current arrangements that you put in place for the audit of insurance. If we're allowed to vary from the global standard, I don't think we need to do anything particular as long as we're clear about what the arrangements are and they make sense to us and we keep them under review. So if that was a question, I'm happy with that as it is. You invite us in part of your report to ask you questions about the adequacy of resourcing of internal audits. So I'm going to ask you a question which is, have you got enough and resource and sufficient quality of resource in the context in which the council finds itself? I guess we're facing more challenges and therefore the expectations of audit might increase reasonably. In that regard, I continue to be unconvinced it's a good use of 120 days to keep doing schools the way we do it, but so I think I would be a question of whether we get good value from that or whether there's other ways to do it, particularly given we seem to be getting reports that say things are okay but they're running deficits. We could do that centrally without visiting 20 schools a year, I think. I found it quite hard to track, and perhaps because I've got rid of all the papers, the plan to the risk documents that we've seen in the corporate governance statement that we've had. But I did feel there was a couple of risks that we looked at the last time the risk report came here that were in the private session, so I won't mention them, that don't appear in here. So I'll just ask whether you're confident that this prioritises all the key risks, and I might tell you outside what those risks were for me. And finally, I've, to use your words, banged on at this committee meeting quite a lot about following up of external audit recommendations, and particularly around financial stability and the way we do budgets and we manage the council's finances overall. I can't see anything of that specifically in this plan, and I think we had agreed that it would go in the plan at some point, so I'll just ask whether that's been deferred or being done in a different way.
You want to comment on those, Martin? First?
So, Chris, that's a number of questions, one of which I'd quite like to answer in private as well, if that's all right, Chair, because it relates to the staffing issues and the competence of colleagues. The issue around the external auditors' recommendations, we have done that report, and I think it's just a case of us bringing it back. It's been to executive team, and we acknowledge that we haven't brought it back yet, so I think we might have to bring it back next time. It's another thing for the next meeting. But we have done that analysis, and it's not bad news or anything. It's not as if we're sort of keeping anything for. So yeah, we have committed to doing that, and we will do that here on in. And this year it'll be better because hopefully we'll get the auditors' external audit recommendations a bit sooner. I accept and acknowledge the point about schools. That having been said, our learning colleagues find that particularly helpful, and that links to the issues that I want to discuss in private, if that's all right. I think the issue around whether internal audit has enough resource is a matter of judgment for us to discuss, and for you. And I say to you that I'll be telling you that I think we just had enough resource last year for me to give you an opinion. We are getting to the point where it's getting quite hard for us to reach a conclusion that we've done a completely balanced set of activity. As long as you know the limitations of what we can actually do, it's legitimate for you to reach the conclusion that you're content with the extent of coverage, and that again comes back to something around the issues around the staffing mix, the staff and competence, as well as the and the skill mix. And it's very hard because, you know, we're asking people to reach judgments on things that they don't totally understand in some instances, or can't be expected to understand, and it's how we get the wider assurance. I also acknowledge that it's quite that there isn't the complete information set here to move from the risk log to but we should discuss the extent to which you believe that risks aren't included in here, because I think I'd like to think that we've put enough in from a timing point of view, because sometimes there are risks, but we know about them already essentially. But I think that is a valid observation. So I think this is a plan that meets the resource. If you don't think that that's enough, that's an observation to make. That you know, and as the report notes, the chief exec's sort of content to have that conversation with you if you think that would be helpful. I'm saying to you, this is a level of assurance that you get if this is how much the organisation wants to spend on internal audit. You probably don't need to spend huge amounts more. We've spent far too much in the past on internal audit. I think it's about quality as much as quantity, and it's about exactly where we want it to go. In the past, you know, internal audit often we're counting petty cash in cupboards, as you know, and these days we don't do any of that. And I think that's where the school reflection comes from. Is that a good use of time? I'm not sure if I've answered any or all of your. I know I've answered some of your questions, Mr. Jones, but not necessarily all of them. And I will give you a bit more answer in the private session, if that's okay.
Yeah, okay, so we've had a few answers. Do you want to come back on the specific response to those?
It was just to remind the committee that when we had the last meeting, I committed to try and make sure we were aligning some of these reports better, and I'm obviously still on with that. The external audit plan is coming on the 10th, and obviously that picks up what the external auditors have picked up as well. So again, we can be better with the timing of some of these and to see that connectivity between, as you say, the audit plans, the risk register and the board assurance framework, and we have committed to do that and take that forward. So it was just a reminder that I am on with that, and we're also going to do a session when we start the new year of kind of what an audit committee's function is, as well as the corporate element of that, the governance element of that. So hopefully we will get a better forward plan for this committee for next year.
Thank you. Councillor Pinnock, and then I'll bring in Gareth. I've seen your hand up, Gareth.
Yeah, so it's a bit of a follow-up again from what Chris has just said. Just looking at the internal audit plan, elsewhere where I currently serve on audit committees, there's not only the link to the risk registers, which is important, but we only see the high-level corporate risk plan. What we don't see is the risk registers for each of the service directorates, which presumably some of this emanates. So it would be useful to have that linked through, because what is not then clear is, are there any risks that have a level of risk that is, most of these are 9 or more. Are there any of those not on there? Because I think we should know that. So that would be the first thing. Then it is not clear to me how the time allocation has been made. You know, what are the criteria around doing, I don't know, 15 presumably days on external residential and only 5 on care phones? Well, that's a follow-up, so that would make sense. But you know, on digital transformation, 10 days. How are those decisions made? Because I think it would be helpful to us to know that, because it obviously determines the depth at which you delve. Then the third point, I do think it would be extremely helpful if then we had another column which said when the reporting date on those internal audit investigations occurred to this committee. So we would, I'm sure you've got a plan of when they each come, because otherwise, if they all came at once, they basically get, and I know we do get some every time, but it'd be helpful if that was, you know, indicated in your plan. So, first committee of the new municipal year, we will see X, Y, and Z. Next committee, the next ones. Just so that we keep a hold on what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, we can do it. We can do it that way if we want. Some of it is meant to try to give a degree of flexibility to the way we deliver work, because I think one of the things that will feature in the annual report is that clearly the colleagues it sometimes gets suggested that people are too busy to see us. Let's put it that way, and that's the nice way to say it in public. I might say it in a different way in the private session, and they get put off, and some of them are easily put off because they want to be, and some of the others are better at saying, no, I need to come and do my auditing. In some respects, actually, us having a quarterly plan would make it easier for us to be able to say to services, the audit committee are insisting that we do this work in this period, so you know you've only got a window of choice of 4 weeks, not a window of choice of 26 or whatever. But some service areas are sort of, and I think that pressures and staffing and it applies to clients as well, and some of them are trying to make big savings at the moment, so you know it's taking out quite a lot of senior colleagues' time. That having been said, sometimes what we're looking at is routine activity area that doesn't involve anybody senior in the organisation, and that almost comes back to the issue about how long do some of these audits take, because some of them are only meant to be strategic overviews and others are meant to be sort of rather more delving into detail. And the digital one is probably by its nature going to be strategic. The other ones, the ones about sort of about children's homes and the likes, actually we've already started the one on children's residential, for example, and that has 3 levels of investigation. Some things around almost allegations, some things about the way that cash is being managed and income is being managed. Not expenditure is being managed on site, and then some of it is about what the money is going on in a sort of strategic sense, i.e. everything apart from staffing and heating bills, which are paid for out of a different budget. So some of the audits have multiple levels, and that's one that will involve both a mixture of detail and strategic decisions. So some of them are bottom level, and you could say if you don't do the bottom level, you never have assurance because you don't know whether your building's built of sand. But for some things, we do have to start from the ideas that we're just looking at the concepts that are being discussed, but others are much more multi-layered, multi-leveled. So that is why some of them take longer. The issue about nines and whatever, well, some of the nines have been done relatively recently. So obviously, almost everything that has got a 9 score or more is well, I think everything is being done over a 3 or 4 year horizon. So that's the resourcing. You're able to do that. We've got lots and lots of things still listed on the risk log that are only scoring 6 or whatever, which are never really going to get touched unless something comes up in those areas or unless they're mixed in. And I think, taking Mr. Jones's point, you could take the view that some things like schools essentially would only score 6 if they were evaluated against the other areas. But this semi-independent autonomous unit issue still constitutes a degree of risk to the organisation because, it's the link between, do we really know what's going on, because the schools, unlike other authorities, are not using SAP or the council's main ledger, and so they can be sending returns that say one thing to the organisation, but the reality might be another, albeit they would get caught out if it was going wildly different because they'd run out of cash at some point.
Okay, thank you. Gareth, thanks for waiting patiently.
Yeah, no problem, Chair. Thank you for bringing me in. Interesting discussion, and one that I do hear quite a bit of, both across local authorities and my. I think there's a couple of sort of observations and points I'd probably make. I mean, one is, as Martin said, there is a limited sort of finite resource for internal audit colleagues. There is a scarcity of specialised internal audit public sector auditors like there are for external audit, as we discussed at the previous meeting in March. That said, therefore, you as members need to be satisfied that this plan, I guess, is focusing on those key risk areas that are in essence the ones that may be keeping you awake at night, to use a phrase? And are you satisfied that that finite resource has been focused into the right areas? And I think, you know, there's been an element of some challenge on that in the debate that we've already had. I think the point that was raised around highlighting the quarterly timings of the potential reports, I think is a helpful thing, and it is something I do see at other local authorities and NHS clients, just to give members or non-exec directors a bit of a heads up in terms of the sort of timing and profiling of the delivery. I think one of the points that Martin raised around audits potentially being put back or deferred as a result of people, in essence, being busy with other things. And I think that's something that I'm sure Martin will be on top of, and I think you as a committee need to be mindful of, because I'm not saying this is the situation at Kirklees, but you know, things that you know, it's really important that the sort of governance and audit assurance process works well at an authority, and I wouldn't want that mindset of pushing and putting off internal audit to become too pervasive at the council, because that would be a concern and a risk from my point of view. And just jumping back briefly to the resourcing point, I think Martin made a point around you know, things are becoming quite tight in terms of being able to potentially get that head of internal audit opinion across the whole of the council itself. So I think that's definitely something that we do need to be mindful of if that situation does sort of tip over the line, because again, that will be quite a significant sort of governance issue. One other thing, just the committee might want to consider, and Martin, apologies, may already do this, but that benchmarking of days of internal audit compared to the other sort of Yorkshire metropolitan councils elsewhere in West Yorkshire and South Yorkshire may be an interesting assessment to do. I know Martin's got very good links into his equivalent peers across the rest of Yorkshire and probably across the north as a whole, and that might again give you a flavour as to whether Martin is below, in line, or above the sort of core number of days. And then again, that might change the debate as to whether, if they were low, you know, does that need to change, or if they're in line with most other equivalent sized metropolitan councils, then the question then may be, are the days then being utilised in the most effective way across the sort of key risk areas of Kirklees? So there wasn't specifically a question in there, Chair, but more, I guess, some comments and observations based on the, you know, the interesting debate that's taken place and some of my experiences from elsewhere. Thank you very much, Chair.
Yep, thank you, Gareth. Okay, Councillor Taylor, you had your hand up as well. And Martin, you wanted to come back up?
I think I'll just make a couple of points from what Gareth said in the private session, if that's okay, Chair, please.
Yeah, well, we need to come to that in terms of whether we have a private session in a second. So I think, Councillor Taylor, if you come in, we'll try to summarise where we've got to and then work out what to do.
Yeah, I'm a bit of a reflector. Apologies for this. We talked about making sure that we've got a clear sight and alignment with the risk register in terms of what's driving our internal audit plan. There's another area that I hope, are taking into consideration as well, and that's complaints. Because often complaints, I know we pick up whistleblowing, but just the volume of complaints in a particular area might suggest that there's something going wrong and you guys need to go in and look. And the example for me, as a councillor, which isn't on this plan, but I feel maybe something you might want to reflect on and talk to the relevant directors about, is bins. Because we've had 6 months of problems with bin collections and they're still ongoing. Now, I accept that there will be periodic problems, but when 6 months in and there still are problems, it suggests something a bit more substantial is going on, and perhaps somebody a little more independent needs to go in and have a look. So that's perhaps one to just reflect on, really. I'll leave it at that, Chair.
Yeah, Rachel.
Sorry, Chair. Just to take the opportunity to come in terms of, I think this has been a really useful conversation, and it's interesting to hear from the external auditors about this. I think certainly from an officer perspective, you know, the internal audit pushback, you know, we've all been made aware of any instances where that's happened within our directorate, and to be able, so that escalation is there, and obviously there'll be different risks to look at in terms of whether that is a legitimate delay. But if it isn't, then obviously it's what we do to prioritise that. So to give you some reassurance, that's very much something that the strategic directors are all aware of. We also have a quarterly performance session, both with officers and then with Cabinet, where we look at multiple different products of assurance and performance, which does try to look at that read across between complaints, performance figures, finance, risk, health and safety, information. I mean, it can be quite a sort of beast, really, when you think about it. But the whole point of discussing them all together is to see that connectivity and be really clear that we are as good as we can be in understanding what the organisation is facing in terms of its risks, and are we putting people in the right places. So I think we're still on a bit of a journey with it to try and get that right, but certainly our new Chief Executive is particularly pushed on the benchmarking, which I know a number of you have mentioned, that we need to be really clear about how we benchmark with other authorities, and sometimes that's harder because of obviously what the difference is between what local authorities deliver, particularly if you look at health and safety and accidents, because it depends on what you've outsourced, doesn't it, depending on what you report on. But we're putting as much benchmarking data in as possible so that we can get a real understanding of how we're performing. So, you know, really happy to try and incorporate some of that into this committee so that you get the same level of assurance that obviously you would need to as a corporate governance and audit committee.
Thank you. So just in terms of obviously what we've discussed and then the recommendations that are here. So I think, if I take it correctly, so we've had some comments about how we might improve the audit plan in the future. So around things like how have we decided on numbers of days? Do we have a quarterly kind of guidance to when things are taking place? Things around benchmarking and understanding how that's worked. So which I think are kind of future feedback and future actions. I would say we've then, in terms of Martin, the resourcing position, if I understand correctly, so it's asking us to note the resourcing position. Well, I think we can kind of do that, but I think you said that there's a further report. Did you say coming to the next meeting about staffing? So we can't really give you a view on, I guess, until we see that report, can we?
I think that the next report is about this year's performance, and therefore you'll see how many audits we managed to achieve, etc. And then you can decide whether you think that is broadly enough to get the assurance. That's the bit. So it's not about staffing as such. It's about the report that's going to come in the future. The next meeting will show you what we managed to achieve this year using a level of resource which is marginally higher than what we have available for next year. Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, because I'm thinking that you know we can note that position at the moment. We might need to see that report to give any sort of additional thoughts or comments. And then I think the final bit that we just probably need to discuss is then in terms of looking at the approval of the actual audit plan as is. So it sounds to me like, well, first off, there's been a couple of specific suggestions made by Councillor Taylor, particularly obviously the one about the housing system. CX, what's it called? CX. So that's something to feed in. Now, obviously, there's then been reference to the risk register, the private risk register. So I'm just wondering, in order to take the decision, do we need to potentially go to a private session to discuss that in more detail? I think we're allowed to, and it's not on the agenda, but I think we are permitted to do that if we agree. Is that?
Can I just come in there, Chair? I think in terms of the decision, it's a public report, so I think the decision needs to be made in public. There's nothing to stop a resolution being passed to go into private session to discuss any matters, but just in terms of the report being public, I think any decisions you make need to be in public session.
Okay. So would would we be able to agree the recommendations on the basis that we will have a further discussion about the specifics around the risk register and any additions that might be required in relation to that?
You can do it that way. I mean, you can go into private session and come back out of private and go back into public if there are matters to be discussed privately.
Chris?
I mean, we'll do whatever works, but the reality is the plan is a plan, isn't it? So I think we've always had some flexibility about whether the plan changes, so I guess we could approve it and then Martin can go away, look at other things as they emerging risks and take on advice and then come back and tell us he's updated it. I'm not sure we need to particularly...
Yeah.
I think we just approve the plan as it is, to be honest.
As long as people...
With that flexibility that's already built into the process.
Yeah, Chair, if you like, there's a couple of things that you've mentioned which I can sort of try to address over the next few weeks, and then we can bring back with the reports next time round. Probably just by bringing you a plan with a little bit more information on, like the audit that Councillor Taylor suggested, I think is a legitimate thing to do. I will need to check out whether they're going to have made enough progress to be worth doing the work that you've described, and I'll find that out. I think there is a little bit of flexibility in the amount of resource we've got. I can almost, if we knew that was right, and I was just saying I've missed it out, you're right, well, put it in. I could do that under the flexibility that I already have. Effectively, you could tell me that you want me to do that, and I could add that in. Or I can go away, find out what progress this is making, and then report that back next time. The comment made by Councillor Pinnock that we should try to tie this down a bit more closely. It is sort of tied down in some of our records already, so we can go. You can bring you back something with. These are the ones we're going to do in the first half of the first quarter of the year. These are the ones we're going to try to do in the second half and bring them back in those particular periods. I can do that as well, and then the other things that we discuss in the private session, I can bring back as part of a proposal for a plan. You know, a few plan changes, because we are getting to the point where we'll have to take something out if we want to add something in. So. It's that balancing bit, Chair.
Okay, so in terms of the report that we've got then, on the basis of that and the discussions that we've had in the slide, kind of, you know, some of the outstanding points to look at, are we happy, because there's a number of recommendations, so I'll just draw people's attentions to the recommendations that we would be agreeing to on page 43. Are members happy that we agree those recommendations, and then we can have a private discussion on some of the specifics as well? Is everybody happy with that? Okay, that's good for the public report. So in terms of the public meeting, I think that's all of the items, is it? So yeah, we'll finish that public meeting now. Thank you.